Normally, when you work with database in Next.js application and you want to create data, you will create API route, right? And then you send a post request, handle the JSON, and then update the UI on the client. But in Next.js app router, you don't actually have to do that. In this video, I will show you how to create, read, and render database data using a server action, Prisma, and dynamic route without writing a single API route. So first, of course, we have to generate a brand new Next.js application. So I'm going to say next node for the application name. All right, so what we have to do first is I like to just set up the Prisma. So let's go to my plugin here and just follow along. So I'm going to copy all these command here. This basically will install the Prisma and the Prisma client. And then what we have to do next is initialize the Prisma. All right, we can run the npx prisma init here. And then what we have to do next is basically we need to update the database URL on the environment variable. I'm going to copy this one right here. So anyway, I'm using the PostgreSQL on my local. If you want, you can just go to postgresql.org, just download it, and just make sure you run your Postgres locally right here, right? And after it's run, so you can just copy the link. Just make sure you have your password in here and then the database name. So I'm gonna say like next node db like this. And then after we update the database URL, what we have to do next, let's take a look. What we have to do is create the model on the schema.prisma. So let's open that, and in here we need to create the model. So anyway, I just want to copy and paste my model called node in here that have an ID that integer. We have title string, slug is string, and this should be unique. All right, the slug is basically the URL in here, like node slash whatever it is, right? And then the content is string, and then the create add it should be date time, and the default is now. That's it. Next, what we have to do is run the npx prisma generate. And then we run the npx prisma db boost, and then we're done, right? Really simple. So let's try to run in that. Here we go. And then now we can try to open the npx prisma studio to just checking the table on the database. So you can see in here we have this node, ID, content, create add, and slug. And then of course we have the title, right? Nice, everything is set up. Oh yeah, I forgot that. So anyway, we have to create the this one right here, the db.ts file on the lib. I forget that. This is the way we initialize the Prisma anyway. So let's create a lib folder and then db.ts file. And then what we have to do is just copy all of this. So this is basically how we initialize Prisma and export that right here. And anyway, we have to install this Prisma adapter basically. So let's try to do that. npm install Prisma adapter -pg, right? This one right here. And then we're done. So first I need to wrap my layout on this router in here with a container. As you can see, we have this maximal width and mx auto to make every children on the center basically. So let's go to page.tsx. I think I just want to remove all this content. And then I'm going to paste this just really simple heading one. And then we have this link. If I click that link, it should be go to /note, right? As you can see, this is the heading one and the link. If I click that, it should be go to /note. So let's try to create that page here. I'm going to say node/page.tsx. So in here, I'm going to create component called node page. As you can see, this is just really simple. We have this heading one and then UL, and then inside that we have this li. So this is basically nodes array, right? We can grab that from the database if you want, but for now, I'm going to say nodes equals to empty array, right? It's fine for now. So let's try to see the result, but make sure the link should be import from the next link. As you can see, we just render the li, and then inside that we have this link. If I click that link, it should be go to the node/nodes.slug. So let's take a look. As you can see, the list, it should be empty because the array is empty right here. If I add data, for example, we have the title here, and then I'm going to say node-1. Okay. So if I save that, oh, of course, we have to put an ID as well. So let's try to put the ID. And for now, I'm going to say 1 because the ID is integer. Let's save. And as you can see, we have node1. Okay. If I click that, it should be go to /node-1. Now we need to create the node form. So I'm going to close all the file in here. And then I'm going to create components folder. And inside that, I'm going to create node-form.tsx. Here we go. So I'm going to paste this component here. Really simple. As you can see, we just have a form in here and the input and then the text area. And I just put require in here. Super simple. So let's try to render that node form on the page in here, on the node page. So just try to put that under the heading 1 like this. Here we go. As you can see, we have this title input and content input. So next we need to create the button submit, right? So I'm going to create that on another component. Here I'm going to create component called submit-button.tsx and paste this component in here. And then I'm going to paste that component or render that component inside the form in here, just like this. There we go. So now we should see that add node button. So why I put the button submit in here on another component? Because I'm going to change this submit button component to the client, because we are going to dealing with the hooks in here. So this should be use client. And then I make sure my node form is always server component, because on the form in here, I'm going to put an actions, right? That's the idea basically. So anyway, I think I'm doing something wrong in here. Why my component is inside the node folder? The component, it should be on the root basically. So that's my bad. So I'm going to move that just like this. So let's try to make sure all the import is fine. Here, I'm going to make sure I import that again. It should become from the add/component. So now we need to create the action function that we can paste that on this action form. So I like to create that on the nodes page right here. So I'm going to create a file called action.ts. And in here, I'm going to export a function called create node, right? And then let's try to just use that function on the node form in here, on the action, just like this. So of course we have to import that like that. Here we go. So now what happened is if I submit the form, this action create node will fire. So let's take a look in here. I'm going to grab the props. So in here, we can grab the from data that have type from data. And then let's just try to just console log that first. And hopefully that works. So here, as you can see, we have this error. The reason is because the function cannot be passed directly to the client component unless you explicitly expose it by making it with use server. So anyway, we have to make sure that this function should be server. So I'm gonna say use a server. Here we go. So now it should be works. As you can see, we have something error again happen here. Create node. Yeah, server action must be async function. So we have to change that to the async. Here we go. So now the error is gone. Nice. So now we can just open the terminal and let's try to put the title here and then content here. Click add node, for example. Let's take a look. As you can see on the on the console here on the terminal, we have these from data, the title, and then the content. That means we have the value, right? Super nice. So let's try to grab that title and then the content. So the way we're grabbing that is pretty simple. We can create a variable called title and then we grab the from data.get. That's the function. So let's try to just console log the title and then the content. Just try to make sure the value is correct. So let's try to put node 1, content 1, whatever it is. So let's click add node. And as you can see, this one right here, we have the value, right? Congratulations, it works. What we have to do now is put the title and then the content into the database, right? Because we're using Prisma, we can just simply say await and then Prisma and then dot. And then we can say node on the node table. And then in here, we can say create, right? And then to create a data, we can just make sure we're using data. And then in here, we can just put an object. So in here, we can put the title set equals to title and then the content set equals to content. And then as you can see, it still have an error in here because the slug is required, I believe, right? The slug is required. So we have to put the slug as well in here. But the problem is the title is random. That means user can typing random things in here with space and etc. So we cannot use the dot and then the space for the slug, right? So we have to use packets like Slugify, I believe. This one right here. As you can see, if we have space, it will becoming some dash string like this and etc. So this is basically really useful package. So we have to install it. And then what we have to do in here is simple. We need to put the slugify and then put the title, comma, and then I want to make sure the lower it should be true. So we always using the lowercase in here. Let's try to also open my Prisma Studio on another terminal in here. npx Prisma Studio. Alright, as you can see, all the data is empty. So let's try to add a node. So here I'm going to say this is node 1 and then the content is just content random. Now let's try to click add node and nothing look happen. But as you can see on the database in here, if I refresh, we have this data, right? That means it's stored successfully on the database. And as you can see the slug, we have this automatically dash symbol right here. So now we have to trying to render that data on the here, right? On the bottom right here. So let's try to go back to the page and then we have to render that in here. So anyway, I just want to remove this array, and what we have to do in here is pretty simple. So I'm going to wait for the Prisma, right? Prisma.node for specific node table. And then what I have to do is say find many to get all the data. And then I just want to make sure I order by the created add and then descending. So as you can see, we have await error in here because the component function is basically not have async. Here we go. As you can see, the node is just rendered. So now we should see the node title. Here we go. As you can see, we have this is node 1. Super nice. If I do this is node 2, if I do content 2, whatever it is, if I click add node, as you can see, it's not automatically render. If I refresh, it's just render. So the problem is because on the action in here, we have to add another function to revalidate the path. So in here, we need to run the revalidate path / node. So revalidate path is basically a function from the next catch, right? So if I save that, now let's take a look. Just make sure everything is up to date. Here, I'm going to say a node 3 and a content 3. Let's try to click add node. And as you can see, it's just right here. That's nice. It works. But the problem is how about the loading? Because now we don't have the loading when I click the add node, right? So to put the loading, it's pretty simple. So let's go back to submit button in here. And basically we can grab the pending value from the useFormStatus. So we need to just import the useFormStatus from React DOM. And then in here, we can just make sure we can disable this button if we on the pending. If the pending is true, just disable the button. And then this text is based on the pending value. We can also do that. Like if the pending true, the saving it should be render the text, and else the add node text it should be render. That's look nice. And also I like to add a loading on the browser in here, right? When we refresh, for example, or when the data is rendered. So the way we adding loading is pretty simple. We need to just create a loading component. So inside the node folder here, I'm going to create loading.tsx. So the name it should be loading. And then I'm going to paste this really simple component that just render this loading node text. So now if I refresh, as you can see, we have the loading text, right? So now let's try to working with the detail, right? To create dynamic road, it's pretty simple. Basically, on the nodes folder, I'm going to create another folder called slug. And then inside that, I'm going to create page.tsx, right? Just that's it. And then what we have to do in here, it's just pretty simple. I just want to copy and paste this component. As you can see, it's just pretty simple. We have this async component called a node detail. And then we grab the props. This is the way we grab the slug value. We can do params equals to await props.params. And then we grab the slug from the params. And then this is basically how we get the data from the database. We're using await Prisma and then node and then find unique where the slug from the database is equal to slug from the params. And then if the node doesn't have any value, just return the node found component. As you can see, we have the heading one and then the p tag in here. Super nice. It works. So let's take a look how we can add loading on the detail in here. Right, as you can see, the loading is just render because we put loading on the parent, but you always can put the loading as well on the slug in here if you want, like a loading.tsx, and then you can just copy and paste from the nodes right here, just paste that. And then now we can just change the content for a loading node detail. If I refresh that, Now, as you can see, we have that loading node detail, right? This is works because on that page, we're just doing await in here. Just to make sure the add node text in here, it should be changed because we add that condition on the submit button right here, right? The text, it should be changed that to the saving. So let's try. This is going to be title 4 and this is content 4, right? So let's try to click add node. And as you can see, we have the saving super fast, and then we have the title 4 in here as well, render. All right, so I think that's it, guys, for this video, and hopefully this is helpful and you can just implement the use server keyword on your project. So thank you so much for watching. See you on the next one.